Okay, so you want to become an astronaut. Floating weightless above the Earth, a view maybe 700 people in human history have ever seen, your name in the history books forever. That's the fantasy. Here's what nobody puts in the recruitment video. Your odds of getting selected are lower than getting into Harvard. And if you somehow make it, the training alone will push you to your absolute limit before you ever leave the ground. NASA's most recent astronaut class accepted around 10 to 12 people out of nearly 18,000 applicants. So today, what it actually takes just to qualify, what 2 years of training really looks like, what NASA actually pays you once you make it, and what happened to 2 astronauts whose 8-day mission accidentally turned into 286 days. Before you can even apply, you need a master's degree in a STEM field, engineering, physical science, computer science, or math, from an accredited school. A bachelor's degree alone doesn't qualify you anymore. NASA raised the bar in 2020. On top of the degree, you need a minimum of 3 years of related professional experience, or 1,000 hours as pilot in command, with at least 850 of those hours in high-performance jet aircraft. This isn't new. When NASA selected its very first astronaut class in 1959, they started by pulling the records of 508 military test pilots. That got narrowed to 110, then 32 finalists, and finally down to 7 men, the original 7. The funnel has always been brutal. It's just gotten worse. In the most recent cycle, NASA received close to 18,000 applications and selected roughly 10 to 12 people. Getting selected doesn't make you an astronaut. It makes you an astronaut candidate, and you spend the next 2 years proving you belong there. A huge part of that happens underwater. NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory in Houston is a pool holding 6.2 million gallons of water, deep enough to submerge a full-scale mock-up of the space station. Candidates train there in full pressurized suits, because working underwater is the closest thing on Earth to simulating weightlessness. A single spacewalk in orbit can last 6 hours or longer, and candidates have to prove they can function, think clearly, and solve problems the entire time while their body is fighting the suit itself. Then there's survival training, and this is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable. In 1997, before his mission, astronaut Jerry Linenger was dropped into a jungle in the Philippines with 3 other pilots, no supplies, and a local guide who didn't speak English. They were out there for 2.5 days with no idea where they were. Decades later, astronaut Mike Massimino was dropped into the Canadian Arctic for 10 days with nothing but basic cold weather gear. The point of these exercises was never really survival skills. NASA has simulators for that. The real point is psychological. Finding out how a candidate handles fear, exhaustion, and isolation before putting them in a spacecraft where a panic response could kill the entire crew. And underneath all of it is a continuous psychological screening process that never really stops. Candidates are put through emergency simulations specifically designed to unsettle them, with interviewers asking questions that have no correct answer, just to see how they react under pressure. Here's the number that should really change how you see this. After a STEM master's degree, years of professional experience, and surviving that entire selection funnel, a new astronaut starts around $100,000 a year and tops out somewhere between $150,000 and $160,000 depending on rank and location. That's a solid income, but for context, it's comparable to what a mid-career electrician or HVAC technician can earn in parts of the country for a job with odds worse than Harvard admission. There's no overtime, there's no hazard pay, there's no bonus for the mission itself. And even after 2 years of training, you're still not guaranteed to fly. NASA currently has only 47 active astronauts total. Some wait years between selection and their first actual mission, training, simulating, and preparing for a flight that might not come for half a decade. When a mission finally does happen, there's one more step nobody expects: quarantine. 14 days before launch, astronauts enter what NASA calls the Health Stabilization Program. Isolated, limited to contact with approved personnel only, required to wear masks and avoid public spaces, even inside their own homes. It's not paranoia. A common cold can stop an astronaut from equalizing ear pressure during a spacewalk, which is enough to scrub a mission that took years to prepare for. During the early Apollo era, astronauts were quarantined for 3 weeks after landing too, over fears they might bring back unknown lunar microbes, a precaution NASA eventually dropped once they were confident the moon wasn't going to infect the planet. So even the astronauts who make it through selection and survive 2 years of training spend their final 2 weeks before the mission they've worked a decade for locked inside a room, hoping they don't catch a cold. In 2024, astronauts Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore launched on what was supposed to be an 8-day test mission to the International Space Station aboard Boeing's Starliner spacecraft. Then, the spacecraft developed technical problems. NASA made the call to bring it back empty and keep the astronauts on the station until a replacement ride became available. 8 days became 286. Read that again. A scheduled 8-day trip turned into nearly 10 months in space, unplanned, away from their families, running on the station's contingency plans. And what did they get paid for that extension? NASA astronauts receive a $5 a day incidental allowance while off-planet. Over that extra 278 days, that comes out to roughly $1,430 each, about the cost of one economy plane ticket for spending an extra 9 months trapped in orbit. And here's the number that puts the whole thing in perspective. Since NASA began selecting astronauts in 1959, only around 370 people have ever made the cut, total, across every class, in over 65 years. More people have summited Mount Everest in a single decade than have ever qualified as a NASA astronaut in the agency's entire history. So here's the verdict. Fantasy score, 10 out of 10. Nothing else on this planet or off it competes with actually going to space. Reality score, 3 out of 10. Worse odds than Harvard, a salary a skilled tradesperson can match, 2 years of training designed to break you down, and a career where you might wait a decade just to fly. Would I personally chase this? Not for the paycheck. But the 370 people who made it clearly weren't doing the math that way either. And that might be the most honest thing this channel can tell you about becoming an astronaut. It isn't a career decision. It's an obsession that happens to also, eventually, come with a government salary. And for the tiny handful of people who actually make it through that funnel, that seems to be exactly the point.